Listen carefully, because this is where most men misunderstand their own struggle. A man often believes that something outside of him is working against him. Circumstances, people, bad luck, the world itself. This belief is comforting because it gives shape to the discomfort he feels. It allows him to point outward and say, that is the cause. But wisdom begins the moment a man turns his attention inward and realizes that the most persistent force shaping his life is not external at all. It is a pattern of thought he repeats, often without questioning it. Thoughts are subtle. They do not announce themselves as threats. They arrive as explanations. They tell stories about why things are the way they are, about who you are, about what is possible and what is not. And the danger is not in having a negative thought. Every man has those. The danger is in believing that the thought is telling the truth simply because it feels familiar. A single thought passes like a cloud. It has little power. But a thought repeated becomes a habit, and a habit repeated becomes a lens through which a man sees everything. Over time, that lens feels like reality itself. This is how a man can wake up one day and feel trapped without knowing when the walls were built. He built them himself, one unquestioned thought at a time. I have seen men with talent convince themselves they were average, men with strength convince themselves they were weak, and men with time convince themselves it was too late. None of this happened because it was objectively true. It happened because the mind learned a pattern and kept replaying it. The mind is efficient, not wise. It repeats what it is fed. Most men do not realize how loyal the mind is. It does not argue with you. If you tell it, I am not enough, it will gather evidence to support that belief. If you tell it the world is against me, it will notice every moment that seems to confirm it. If you tell it, I cannot change, it will protect that identity fiercely. The mind does not seek truth, it seeks consistency. This is why two men can live the same experience and walk away with completely different lives. One sees challenge and grows. The other sees threat and retreats. The difference is not the event, it is the interpretation. An interpretation is born in thought. A wise man learns to slow down and observe his inner dialogue, not to fight it, not to silence it, but to listen with distance. He asks himself, is this a fact or is this a story I have told myself many times? That single question creates space, and in that space, a man regains choice. Most suffering does not come from what happens, but from what a man tells himself about what happens. Failure hurts, but the story I am a failure hurts far more and lasts far longer. Rejection stings, but the thought I am unlovable corrodes from the inside. Life will always deliver pain. Wisdom determines whether pain becomes poison. Many men confuse their thoughts with their identity. They say, this is just how I am, without realizing they are describing a pattern, not a truth. A pattern can be interrupted. An identity feels permanent. This confusion keeps men stuck longer than any external obstacle ever could. Understand this. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who hears them. The moment you realize that, you stop being owned by every sentence that appears in your mind. Thoughts can be loud. They can be convincing. They can be persistent. But they are not commands unless you treat them as such. The mind will often present its patterns as logic. Based on the past, this won't work. People like you don't succeed. You should stay where it's safe. These statements sound reasonable. They are delivered calmly. That is why they pass unquestioned. A wise man learns that logic without courage becomes a prison. Past data cannot predict future growth if the man himself is changing. When a man begins to notice these patterns, something important happens. He stops reacting automatically. He stops mistaking familiarity for truth. He understands that repetition is not evidence. Just because a thought has been there for years does not mean it deserves loyalty. This awareness does not remove struggle. It changes the relationship with it. The mind still offers its old stories, but they no longer sit in the driver's seat. They become background noise instead of instructions. And slowly, as attention shifts, the patterns weaken, not because they are fought, but because they are no longer fed. A wise man is careful with what he repeatedly tells himself. especially in moments of exhaustion, disappointment, or solitude. Those are the moments when patterns deepen. He knows that discipline of thought is not about positivity, but about honesty. Brutal honesty. The kind that says, this thought feels real, but it may not be true. Freedom does not begin when life becomes easy. It begins when a man realizes that his inner world is not fixed, that the voice in his head is not a ruler, but a habit. And habits can be reshaped with awareness, patience, and consistency. Once a man understands this, he stops searching for enemies in the dark and starts taking responsibility for the light. And that realization alone changes everything. Let me speak to you now about a truth most men sense but rarely articulate. A man's greatest battles do not announce themselves. They do not come with noise, witnesses, or clear victories. They unfold quietly, in the privacy of his own mind, often while the world believes he is doing just fine. A man can be admired, respected, even envied, and still be fighting wars no one sees. He can fulfill responsibilities, meet expectations, and keep moving forward while something inside him feels restless, conflicted, or heavy. This is not weakness. This is the human condition, when inner questions remain unanswered. The silent battle usually begins with tension between what a man knows and what he does. He knows what would make him stronger, healthier, more honest. He knows when something is no longer right for him. He knows when he is avoiding, settling, or betraying his own standards. And yet, he delays, he compromises, he convinces himself it can wait. That gap between knowing and acting is where the real struggle lives. No one applauds a man for choosing discipline when no one is watching. No one notices when he resists an impulse, swallows his pride, or sits with discomfort instead of escaping it. But these moments shape him far more than public success ever will. Every quiet choice either strengthens his inner foundation or slowly erodes it. Many men feel exhausted not because, Ife is demanding, but because they are constantly arguing with themselves. Half of them wants growth, purpose, and meaning. The other half wants comfort, familiarity, and relief. This internal negotiation runs day after day, draining energy, clarity, and peace. And because it happens silently, men often assume this exhaustion is just part of life. It doesn't have to be. A wise man learns to recognize when his fatigue is not physical but moral. It comes from repeatedly acting against what he knows to be true. Each small betrayal of self may seem harmless, but over time it creates a fracture. Confidence weakens not because a man fails publicly, but because he stops trusting himself privately. This is why integrity is built in silence. Integrity is not a performance for others. It is alignment with oneself. When a man keeps his word to himself, even in small things, something inside him stabilizes. When he repeatedly breaks those promises, something inside him becomes unstable. He may still function, but he no longer feels grounded. The silent battle also reveals itself in hesitation. A man feels the urge to speak, but stays quiet, to leave, but remains, to begin, but waits. These moments are invisible to the world, yet they accumulate. Over time, hesitation becomes a habit, and habit becomes identity. The man begins to say, "This is just how I am," not realizing he is describing a pattern he has practiced, not a truth he was born with. There is a loneliness in this drug that few talk about. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of feeling unseen in your effort. Men are often valued for outcomes, not for the internal discipline it takes to reach them. And so many men carry their struggles quietly, believing they must handle everything alone. A wise man understands that silence can be strength, but isolation is not. Still, even when support exists, the final decision is always internal. No one can fight your inner battles for you. Advice can guide, encouragement can help, but the moment of choice belongs to you alone. That responsibility is heavy, but it is also where dignity lives. The mind will often resist change by making comfort feel reasonable. It will say, now is not the right time. You need more certainty. It's safer to wait. These thoughts are not loud or dramatic. They are calm, logical, and convincing. That is why they win so often. They don't feel like fear. They feel like maturity. A wise man learns to question calm excuses as much as emotional ones. He understands that growth always carries discomfort, that clarity often demands courage before confidence appears, that waiting for certainty is often just another way of postponing responsibility, and he learns that the presence of resistance is not a signal to stop, but often a sign that something meaningful is at stake. The internal battle is not something a man wins once and for all. It is something he manages daily. Some days he chooses well, some days he doesn't. Wisdom is not perfection. It is awareness followed by correction. A man who notices when he has drifted can always return. A man who refuses to look remains lost longer than necessary. When a man finally accepts that his greatest battles are internal, he stops blaming circumstances for patterns that keep repeating. He stops waiting for motivation and starts practicing alignment. He understands that discipline is not punishment, but self-respect in action. Life will always challenge a man. There will always be pressure, uncertainty, and loss. But the greatest danger is not what happens to him. It is what happens inside him when he stops paying attention. Because when the inner battle is neglected, the outer life eventually reflects that chaos. A wise man does not seek an easy life. He seeks an honest one. He knows that mastering the world without mastering himself leads to emptiness. And he knows that every silent victory within strengthens him in ways no external success ever could. Because the moment a man wins a battle no one saw, he becomes someone no one can easily break. Let me continue with something every man carries, whether he admits it or not. There are forces inside the mind that do more damage than any external obstacle ever could, not because they are strong, but because they are familiar. Fear, doubt, and ego do not need to overpower a man. They only need to guide him quietly, day after day, until he mistakes their voice for his own. Fear is usually the first to speak. It presents itself as protection. It remembers pain, failure, embarrassment, and loss, and it stores those memories carefully. Its purpose is simple: avoid suffering. And in moments of real danger, fear is useful. But when fear becomes the main advisor in everyday life, it begins to limit far more than it protects. A man ruled by fear does not only avoid harm, he avoids growth. Fear does not shout. It asks questions that sound reasonable. What if you fail? What if you look foolish? What if you lose what you already have? These questions are not lies, but they are incomplete truths. Fear never asks what might happen if you succeed. It never calculates the cost of staying the same. It only measures risk in one direction. And when a man listens without questioning, fear slowly shrinks his world. Then there is doubt, quieter and more persistent. Doubt does not tell a man he cannot act. It tells him he is not ready, not good enough, not experienced enough, not the right one. Doubt disguises itself as humility, as realism, as intelligence. Many men believe doubting themselves makes them wise. In truth, constant doubt often reflects a lack of trust in one's own judgment. Doubt delays action, and delay is powerful. A dream postponed long enough begins to feel unrealistic. A decision delayed long enough feels unnecessary. Over time, doubt turns potential into regret, without ever demanding a clear surrender. The man simply never begins. Ego is different. From both fear and doubt, yet it works alongside them. Ego is not just arrogance. Ego is attachment to identity. It is the part of the mind that says, "This is who I am, and this image must be protected." Ego fears being wrong more than being stuck. It fears embarrassment more than stagnation. It prefers familiar limitation over unfamiliar growth. Ego tells a man to stay silent when he should ask, to appear confident when he is confused, to defend old decisions even when they no longer serve him. Ego makes learning feel like weakness and change feel like loss. And because ego is tied to pride, men often defend it fiercely, without realizing what it costs them. When fear, doubt, and ego work together, they create a powerful internal system. Fear warns of danger, doubt questions ability, and ego refuses vulnerability. The result is a man who feels intelligent but trapped, cautious but dissatisfied, safe but unfulfilled. He may look stable from the outside, but inside something feels unfinished. The most dangerous part is that these forces rarely feel destructive. They feel familiar. They feel like the voice a man has always known, and what feels familiar is rarely questioned. A man may say, "This is just how I think," without realizing he is describing a habit, not a truth. A wise man learns to observe these forces without obeying them automatically. He notices when fear is speaking and asks whether the threat is real or imagined. He notices when doubt appears and asks whether it is protecting him or limiting him. He notices when ego resists change and asks what identity he is trying to preserve. This observation alone weakens their grip. Fear loses power when a man remembers that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act with clarity despite it. Doubt loses power when a man understands that readiness is not a prerequisite for action, but a result of it. Ego loses power when a man values growth over image, truth over comfort. A wise man does not try to eliminate these forces. That would be foolish. Fear, doubt, and ego are parts of the human mind. He learns instead to place them in their proper position. Fear becomes an advisor, not a ruler. Doubt becomes a signal to prepare, not to retreat. Ego becomes a tool for confidence, not a prison for identity. This balance takes practice. There will be moments when fear speaks louder than wisdom, when doubt feels convincing, when ego resists necessary change. Wisdom is not about never falling into these patterns. It is about recognizing them sooner and returning to alignment faster. One of the most important lessons a man can learn is this: the mind will always argue for comfort, using intelligent language. It will call avoidance patience. It will call fear caution. It will call ego self-respect. A wise man listens carefully, not just to the words, but to the outcome those words produce in his life. If a thought consistently leads to shrinking, stagnation, or resentment, it deserves examination, no matter how reasonable it sounds. Over time, as a man practices this awareness, something changes. Decisions become cleaner, energy returns, the constant inner negotiation quiets. He no longer wastes strength fighting himself. He chooses his direction and moves, even when uncertainty remains. This is when confidence stops being something he performs and becomes something he inhabits. Not because fear disappeared, but because it no longer decides. Not because doubt vanished, but because it no longer delays action indefinitely. Not because ego died, but because it stopped demanding control. A wise man understands that the mind can either sharpen him or sabotage him. The difference lies in who is holding the reins. And when fear, doubt, and ego are no longer allowed to lead, a man finally walks forward with clarity instead of conflict. Let me tell you something subtle, something most men overlook because it feels too simple to matter. The mind does not grow stronger on its own. It grows in the direction of what you repeatedly give it, not what you intend to give it, not what you say you value, but what you actually feed it day after day through attention, repetition, and habit. A man may believe his thoughts are random, uncontrollable, something that simply happens to him. That belief alone gives the mind permission to wander wherever it wants. But the truth is this: the mind is a multiplier. Whatever you place into it consistently, it magnifies. Feed it fear, and fear expands. Feed it resentment, and resentment deepens. Feed it discipline, and discipline becomes natural. This is not philosophy, it is observation. A single thought means little. A single bad day means little. But patterns matter. The mind learns through repetition, not logic. You can understand something intellectually and still live its opposite if your habits point in a different direction. This is why many men know what would improve their lives, yet feel unable to act. Their minds have been trained elsewhere. Consider how easily negativity spreads inside a man. One complaint leads to another. One comparison invites 10 more. One moment of self-pity becomes a story about life itself. The mind does not resist this because it feels familiar. Familiarity is comforting, even when it is destructive. The mind would rather repeat pain it knows than risk uncertainty it does not. A wise man watches what he allows to repeat. What you consume shapes what you think. What you think shapes what you notice. What you notice shapes how you interpret your life. This is why two men can stand in the same situation and experience completely different realities. One sees proof of limitation, the other sees a challenge to rise. The situation is the same. The mind they have fed is not. Many men unknowingly train their minds to look for threat, disrespect, and failure. They replay old conversations. They imagine worst-case outcomes. They revisit past mistakes as if punishment will somehow produce wisdom. The mind, loyal as it is, assumes this repetition is important, and so it sharpens itself in that direction. Over time, the man wonders why peace feels so distant. The mind does not care whether what you feed it is helpful or harmful. It only cares that it is repeated. This is why complaining becomes easier with time, why discipline feels harder when neglected, why confidence fades when unused. The mind adapts to the environment you create inside it. A wise man is intentional about that environment. He understands that attention is nourishment. Where attention goes, energy follows. This is why he is careful with what he dwells on during moments of weakness. Fatigue, disappointment, and loneliness are the moments when the mind is most impressionable. Feed it chaos then, and chaos becomes familiar. Feed it steadiness, and steadiness takes root. This does not mean ignoring reality or pretending everything is fine. Wisdom is not denial, it is discernment. A wise man acknowledges pain without marinating in it. He studies failure without building a home there. He reflects without replaying endlessly. There is a difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection teaches, rumination drains. One moves you forward, the other keeps you stuck while giving the illusion of thoughtfulness. The mind cannot tell the difference unless you teach it. Repetition also shapes identity. What a man tells himself repeatedly about who he is eventually feels lick. Fact. I'm always behind. I'm not disciplined. I lose motivation quickly. These statements may begin as observations, but repeated often enough, they become instructions. The mind hears them and responds, understood, and begins to behave accordingly. A wise man speaks to himself carefully, not softly, but truthfully. He does not lie to himself with empty optimism. He also does not punish himself with careless language. He understands that words repeated internally shape behavior just as powerfully as actions. If you repeatedly tell yourself you are weak, the mind will conserve energy. If you repeatedly tell yourself you are capable, the mind will look for solutions. If you repeatedly focus on what is missing, the mind will live in scarcity. If you repeatedly focus on what can be built, the mind will move toward creation. This is why discipline of thought matters more than momentary inspiration. Inspiration is fleeting. Repetition is permanent. A man does not need to control every thought. That is impossible. He needs to control what he dwells on, what he rehearses, what he allows to become familiar. Over time, the mind begins to cooperate instead of resist. This is also why small daily habits matter more than dramatic changes. 5 minutes of intentional focus every day outweighs 1 hour of intensity once a month. The mind responds to consistency, not intensity. It trusts what shows up regularly. A wise man does not wait until his mind is perfect to act. He acts while training it. He chooses better inputs, even when old patterns are loud. He limits exposure to what weakens him and increases exposure to what strengthens him, not obsessively, but deliberately. And slowly, almost quietly, the inner climate changes. What once felt heavy feels manageable. What once felt overwhelming feels clear. Not because life became easier, but because the mind became better trained. A trained mind does not panic easily. It does not exaggerate threats. It does not collapse under uncertainty. It has been fed resilience repeatedly. This is the hidden advantage of self-mastery. When pressure arrives, the mind defaults to what it knows. If it knows chaos, it produces chaos. If it knows order, it produces clarity. A wise man understands that he is always feeding his mind, whether he is conscious of it or not. The only real choice is whether he does so intentionally or by neglect, because in the end, the mind will always grow in the direction of what you give it most. Let me tell you where real change begins. because many men search for it in effort, in discipline, in force, and still feel stuck. Change does not begin when you try harder. It begins the moment you see clearly. Awareness is not passive. It is the turning point where a man stops being carried by his habits and starts standing inside his choices. Most men live on automatic. They wake up, react, think, speak, decide, and move without ever noticing the patterns guiding them. They assume his is just life. But a wise man knows that unconscious living is the fastest way to lose control without realizing it. You cannot change what you do not see, and you cannot lead what you do not understand. Awareness is the act of stepping back from the noise of the mind and observing it without immediately obeying it. It is the difference between being inside the storm and watching the storm pass. The thoughts still appear, the emotions still rise, but something changes when a man notices them instead of identifying with them. The grip loosens. Most men think control comes from suppressing thoughts or emotions. That is not control, that is tension. True control comes from clarity. When you clearly see what is happening inside you, you no longer need to fight it blindly. You can respond instead of react. A man without awareness reacts. He reacts to pressure, to criticism, to temptation, to fear. His life becomes a series of reflexes shaped by habit. A man with awareness pauses, even if only for a moment, and in that pause he gains choice. That pause is where power lives. Awareness begins with simple noticing. Noticing when your energy drops. Noticing when a familiar excuse appears. Noticing when your body tightens before a decision. Noticing when you are about to repeat a pattern you have repeated 100 times before. This noticing is not judgment. It is observation. Judgment clouds awareness. Curiosity sharpens it. A wise man watches himself the way a craftsman has his tools. He does not insult them. He studies them. He learns what dulls them and what sharpens them. Over time, this observation becomes natural. He no longer needs dramatic moments to reflect. Reflection becomes woven into daily life. The moment awareness appears, responsibility appears with it. This is why many avoid awareness, because once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you recognize a pattern, you can no longer pretend it is accidental. Awareness removes comfortable excuses. It hands the man his power back, and power always comes with responsibility. This can feel uncomfortable at first. A man may notice how often he distracts himself, how quickly he avoids discomfort, how often he chooses ease over growth. This is not meant to shame him. It is meant to free him. You cannot correct a path you refuse to look at. Awareness also softens inner conflict. When a man stops fighting himself blindly, the constant tension eases. He understands why he feels pulled in different directions. He sees the competing motives instead of being torn by them. This understanding brings calm, not because the struggle disappears, but because it becomes clear. Many men think awareness will make them overthink. In truth, it does the opposite. It ends unnecessary thinking. Rumination thrives in confusion. Awareness brings order. When you see what matters, the noise fades naturally. A wise man learns to ask himself better questions. Not why am I like this, but what is happening in me right now, not what's wrong with me, but what pattern is repeating. These questions invite clarity instead of self-attack, and clarity leads to action. Awareness also reconnects a man with his values. When you are unconscious, your actions drift away from what you claim to stand for. When you are aware, misalignment becomes uncomfortable quickly. This discomfort is not punishment. It is guidance. It points you back toward integrity. This is where discipline becomes easier. Discipline without awareness feels like force. Discipline with awareness feels like alignment. You no longer push yourself blindly. You move because you see why it matters. Motivation becomes less emotional and more grounded. Awareness does not require isolation or long hours of reflection. It requires honesty in small moments. Honesty about what you are avoiding. Honesty about what you are feeding your mind. Honesty about where you are settling. These moments of honesty accumulate. Slowly, they reshape the man. A man who practices awareness notices progress sooner. He notices when he responds differently than before, when he pauses instead of reacting, when he chooses the harder right over the easier wrong. These moments build quiet confidence, not the loud confidence that seeks approval, but the steady confidence that comes from self-trust. Awareness also teaches patience. A man sees that change is not instant. He stops demanding perfection from himself. He focuses on direction instead of speed. He understands that mastery is built through consistency, not intensity. This patience keeps him steady when old patterns resurface, and they will resurface. Awareness does not erase habits overnight. It weakens them gradually. Each time a man notices a pattern and chooses differently, even slightly, he shifts the trajectory. Over time, the old paths grow less traveled. The new ones become familiar. This is the quiet miracle of awareness. It does not shout, it does not impress, but it transforms everything it touches. When a man becomes aware, he stops being a passenger in his own life. He takes the wheel, not with aggression, but with clarity. He knows where he is, he knows where he is going, and even when the road is uncertain, he moves forward consciously. Because the moment a man truly sees himself, he is no longer lost. Now let me bring this reflection to where it must ultimately arrive, because everything we have spoken about leads here. Mastery does not begin when life becomes calm. It begins when a man realizes that, even in chaos, he still has one responsibility he cannot abandon: choosing his thoughts consciously. Most men believe their thoughts simply happen to them. They believe choice begins only with action. But a wise man understands something deeper. Action is the final link in a long chain. Thought is the first. And whoever controls the first link shapes everything that follows. Choosing your thoughts does not mean controlling every idea that appears in your mind. That would be impossible and exhausting. Thoughts will arise from memory, fear, habit, and impulse. Wisdom is not about stopping them. It is about deciding which ones deserve your agreement. A thought becomes powerful the moment you believe it. Before that, it is just noise. The problem is that many men believe their thoughts automatically, without consent. The thought appears, feels familiar, and is treated as truth. Over time, this habit quietly hands control away. Mastery begins the moment a man interrupts this process. When a thought appears, a wise man asks himself not aggressively, but calmly, is this thought useful? Is it accurate? Is it aligned with the man I am trying to become? This pause is small, but it is everything. In that pause, the man is no longer a servant to his mind. He is a steward of it. Conscious thought choice is not positive thinking. It is disciplined thinking. It is not about telling yourself comforting lies. It is about refusing to let destructive narratives run unchallenged. A wise man does not replace every negative thought with optimism. He replaces it with clarity. For example, instead of "I can't do this," he may choose "This is difficult and I can learn." Instead of "I always fail," he may choose "I have failed before and I am still standing." These are not fantasies. They are grounded truths that move a man forward instead of freezing him in place. This practice takes humility, because choosing your thoughts consciously means admitting that some of the stories you have told yourself for years are not serving you. It means letting go of familiar identities, even painful ones, that once felt safe. And letting go always feels like loss before it feels like freedom. A wise man accepts this discomfort. He understands that the mind resists change not because the change is wrong, but because the old patterns are familiar. Familiarity feels like safety to the mind. Conscious choice feels like risk. And yet, every meaningful transformation requires stepping into that risk. Over time, as a man practices choosing his thoughts, something subtle shifts. The mind becomes less reactive. Old triggers lose some of their force. Situations that once caused spirals now cause pauses. This does not mean the man becomes emotionless. It means he becomes grounded. Grounded men are not controlled by every mood. They feel deeply, but they decide deliberately. This is where true freedom lives, not in the absence of struggle, but in the ability to respond rather than react. A man who chooses his thoughts consciously can experience fear without being ruled by it. He can experience doubt without surrendering to it. He can experience pride without being trapped by it. Conscious choice also restores self-respect. Each time a man chooses a thought that aligns with growth instead of decay, he reinforces trust in himself. This trust compounds. Confidence stops being something he seeks externally and becomes something he carries internally. This is why mastery feels quiet. There is no applause for choosing a better thought in a hard moment, no recognition for reframing a story when no one else knows you struggled, and yet these moments build a man from the inside out. A wise man knows that life will never stop presenting challenges. Pressure will return, old patterns will attempt to reassert themselves, but he no longer fears this. He understands that mastery is not a destination he reaches once. It is a practice he returns to daily. Some days he will choose well. Some days he will catch himself late. Wisdom is not perfection. It is consistency over time. It is returning to awareness again and again without self-condemnation. Choosing your thoughts consciously also changes how a man relates to others. He becomes less reactive, less defensive, less easily provoked. Not because he is passive, but because he is clear. He knows which thoughts are worth engaging and which are simply noise. This clarity creates presence, and presence creates authority. Not the authority that demands attention, but the authority that naturally commands respect. A man who governs his inner world does not need to dominate the outer one. In time, the mind begins to trust the man. When a challenge arises, the mind no longer panics immediately. It looks for solutions. It remembers past resilience. It aligns itself with direction instead of resistance. This is the reward of consistent conscious choice. And slowly, almost without announcement, the inner conflict that once drained energy begins to quiet. The constant negotiation fades. Decisions become simpler, not because life is simpler, but because the man is clearer. This is mastery, not controlling the world, not eliminating struggle, but standing firmly inside yourself, choosing your inner direction even when circumstances are uncertain. And when a man learns to choose his thoughts with intention, he no longer walks through life as a reaction to his past, but as an author of his future.